The role of the International Monetary Fund has been under some scrutiny during the credit crunch and during the recovery and ahead of the Asian Financial Forum 2010. We're talking to the Managing Director of the IMF, Dominique Strauss-Kahn, and thanks indeed for joining us from Washington. Now, really looking at that sustainable recovery, if one could put it that way, what's your view? Some people talk about a U-shaped recovery, some people talk about a double dip.
Well, our view is not the one of a double dip. It does not mean that the probability is zero and that it cannot happen, but it's not our preferred scenario, and I don't believe that it will be the case. But that's the good news. But on the other hand, the problem is that the recovery, even if it's not, it's a regular recovery, seems to be rather sluggish recovery and not very strong, and more important, a recovery in many places, in many parts of the world, which could be a jobless recovery.
So do you see a real split between what you'd call the major developed countries and the major developing countries where it comes to this recovery?
Yeah, that's a possibility. Some have talked about a two-speed or a multi-speed recovery, which is part of the reality. Asian countries globally are doing well, rather well, and most of them are almost off beyond the crisis. Developed economies, including the US, European economies, and Japan, are still lagging behind.
So, Mr. Strauss-Kahn, what do you see as the real risks for the global economy, indeed for the Asian economy, when you're looking at this sustained recovery?
You know, the situation is a very asymmetric situation. Of course, there is a cost to go on with the stimulus too long, and we have to take care about debt sustainability. Debt has increased in most countries, and the question of the fiscal sustainability will be one of the major questions in the coming years. But on the other hand, if we exit too early from the stimulus, then there is a risk to go back to the crisis.
So in looking at the economic picture, it looks as if you're talking really about perceptions rather than about what other people would mention, which is unsustainable asset values.
Well, there's no surprise that things are at least as the way the people are thinking is at least as important as the reality. Economy always has been a question of psychology, and that's the very difficult situation in which we are. Because on one hand, it's necessary to show that the recovery has beginning and that things are getting better, that we are seeing the end of the tunnel. On the other hand, we shouldn't say this be too vocal on this, because then people may believe that everything is over. And as you say, there's a lot of liquidity in the world today and a growing risk appetite, and this leads to some new risk that may create problem looking forward.
And talking about liquidity, should Asian governments and other governments around the world really be looking at raising interest rates at this time?
Well, coordinated view is always the good thing to do. If we escape if we avoid this crisis to be what 1 year ago, a little more than 1 year ago, most of us were thinking about, namely that this crisis could be as big, as severe as the Great Depression. If we avoid this, it's mainly because of this coordinated action and cooperation among countries. And it will really be a pity, and more than that, if after the crisis, the effort which has been made to reach consensus, to work together, would just vanish. So, concerning the specific topic you were talking about, rising interest rate, the problem is that it's very difficult for any country today, including Asian country, to make a decision alone.
So are you satisfied that China and India in particular are opening their markets sufficiently?
Well, you will be surprised if I answer yes. But the move is in the right direction. We all have to understand that it's rather easy to define a better world than this one. What is difficult is to know how we go from where we are to where we want to go. The transition is a difficult point, and it takes time. And so more open market, including in China and India. A higher value of the currency, especially for China and other currencies which are related to the renminbi, goes in the right direction.
And now looking at the role of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, how would you see that role really changing since the credit crunch and moving forward?
Well, you know, the IMF has different role, typically depending on the kind of situation in which you are. When you're in the crisis, at the climax of the crisis, the main role for the IMF is providing financing to the countries having financing gap and also policy advice to try to reduce the financing gap. But there is a new role. And the new role is that, as I said before, one of the obvious lessons of this crisis is that we're in a more globalized economy than we were before, which means that solution has to be discussed at the global level. And that's exactly the route which is followed by the G20, which the new system or the new process the G20 tries to set up, which is called the Mutual Assessment Program, which is basically trying to see together what are the forecasts for the different countries, what they want to do and how it matches, or if it's inconsistent.
So do you see countries more frequently beginning to use these special drawing rights?
Yes, a huge change has been made last April in London at the G20 meeting, where the resources of the IMF have been tripled. So we are now big enough to face, for the time being, any kind of a financial crisis and providing the countries, our membership, with the needed resources. But another thing is the one you mentioned, which is the special drawing rights, which is a kind of a special possibility for the countries to borrow through the IMF process.
So, Mr. Strauss-Kahn, do you see special drawing rights as being a currency of last resort where it comes to the future?
Well, I think at the possibility to provide this loans of last resort, which does not mean that at the same time I believe that in the short term the IMF currency, or so-called IMF currency, could become a substitute to the country's currency, including the most important one today, which is the US dollar. The US dollar, in my view, is going to remain the main currency for a long period of time, even if it's challenged by some others, like the euro today, in some respect the yen, maybe tomorrow, if it becomes a more market currency, the Chinese renminbi. And in this basket of currency, the IMF SDR may be part of the solution. So I'm not a believer that in the short term we could have a kind of a shift from the dollar to another currency.
You are, of course, attending the Asian Financial Forum here in Hong Kong. What would you see as the priorities for the forum in 2010?
Well, because the role of Asia has increased, and the part of Asia has increased in the global growth, and the role of Asia has been so prominent in the crisis, Asia has to think about its role in stabilizing the global economy. So, you know, when you're at the periphery of a system, then you can just play as a free rider and try to take advantage of what you can and avoid problems, and that's it. The more you become a big player, and now you have in Asia a lot of big players, including China, the more you have responsibility on the way the whole system is working. So I think this conference is a very important conference because it's one of the moments where it will be possible to discuss how will Asia take into account its new role in the global economy.
Dominique Strauss-Kahn, thanks very much indeed for joining us, and he's a guest speaker at the Asian Financial Forum 2010 in Hong Kong.